Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you the extra nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding and appreciation of the war in Ukraine. I don't mean appreciate like, I mean appreciate, understand, of course. Anyway, where should we go to first? Well, Zelenskyy is presently in the UK. He was met, I believe, at Stansted Airport, of all places, by Rishi Sunak. And he's made an announcement to Parliament, although not in Parliament, somewhere else. This is a fascinating exchange here. Basically, everyone's fawning over him for the right reasons, right? So everyone can't wait to get shake his hand and congratulate him and all this. So everyone's like, oh, Zelenskyy. So from his point of view, you're thinking, right, I've got a captive audience, and these are all really powerful people. I'm meeting all the opponents as well, the opposition leaders, as well as Rishi Sunak and all the government, and everyone's clapping me, and I'm getting huge applause. And there's been this really fawning speech where they're like saying all the lovely things about me, and it's all correct. This is absolutely, I'm fully in support of this. But think of it from his point of view, right? So he's come there and he's thinking, right, I've got this captive audience. Everyone appears to love me. Everyone's on my side. And everyone's trying to virtue signal to each other how much they like me. And therefore will bend over backwards to kind of be seen to be doing the right thing. How can I manipulate this situation to further my own ends here? What do I need most? Right, I know what I need most. How can I ask for this in a way that's super public so that they can't really say no? That will possibly go viral, will have really symbolic meaning, and will just be like a perfect way of doing this. And how can I use words really effectively to achieve that? And this is what you get. So I mean, this is fabulous. This is Zelenskyy at his best. Speech writing, or not necessarily speech writing here, but thinking about how to get your own ends here. Just to let you know, he's the Speaker of the House of Commons there. So he is actually in the Labour Party, but he's basically neutral while he's the Speaker. And he made a very nice speech saying all the right things about Zelenskyy.
I will explain. It's the helmet of a real Ukrainian pilot. He is one of our most successful aces, and he's one of our kings. And the writing on the helmet reads, "We have freedom, give us wings to protect it."
So that is brilliant. I've hairs on my arms are up. This is great. I just love his husky, almost certainly smoker's voice, and that gruff kind of Zelenskyy way with words he has. But he's given a helmet as a present, and he's saying, "We have freedom. Give us wings to protect it." And what's he saying? Give me frickin' planes. Give me fricking planes. That's what I want. And look at me, your captive audience. I'm saying this in public, so all your media know what I want. This is what I want. And none of you will have the guts to say no. Absolutely brilliant. This is statesmanship. This is fantastic. Now, we've heard today that the UK are going to be training Ukrainian fighter pilots. I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth in a second. But just think what he's done here. He's been. This is the first place he's gone. Outside of first place he's gone. I think since the war has begun. Sorry. No, of course it's not. It's the first time he's gone to the UK. So first time he's gone to the UK since the war's begun, and he has one intention, and that is I need planes. And this is a really big ask, but if I can do this in such a way that they can't say no, and this can go viral, then I get what I need, and this is brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and I think he's played that perfectly. So he's got the symbolism of the helmets. There's a gift there, but then also the metaphor and the symbolism of freedom and protecting it with wings. Yeah, just very very clever bit of statecraft. And talking about planes, so Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute has been talking about. Well, first of all, he was talking about UK training pilots, which has been agreed today. So this is something that's come out today. This must have been already ready to go because it was announced pretty much as soon as Zelenskyy touched, put his feet into the UK. So on UK training Ukrainian pilots, no, this doesn't mean training on the Typhoon like the Eurofighter, or that the UK will soon supply jets. Training NATO tactics, cockpit procedures in non-type specific simulators will speed up later conversion to F-16 or Gripen and add tactical value with current types. In other words, what I assume is they'll get the generic training in the UK, and then they can get the bespoke training to particular aircraft after that. So this might be non-pilot trained trainees, if you like. It is non-pilots, rather than taking people who are already trained as pilots and say, right, we're going to train you on F-16. It's like the way I understand this anyway is like getting in a bunch of people. Let's get them trained up as pilots. Here's your generic training. And then someone asked him the question I've been wondering, and Thierry as well in the comments, be talking about tornadoes. So tornadoes are basically a bomber, the UK bomber that Germany's also got a bunch. We stopped using in 2019, so we've got a bunch of them hanging around. I was thinking, why don't we give these to Ukraine? This is a perfect opportunity to give a pretty decent bomber to the Ukrainians to do a job. Uh, but Justin Bronk here then goes on to say no. So someone asked that question. With Tornado GR4s retired in 2019, surely the most obvious aircraft for the UK to donate. No, they've been used for spare parts to keep the German fleet going. So the German fleet is still going, I think, on them, or they're just phasing them out now. And they've obviously cannibalized our fleet to give stuff to them. GR4 offers no air-to-air capability, which is what the Ukrainian Air Force needs the most. They probably need multi-role fighters, so they need to be able to do seed activities, but also hit other planes around them. And tornadoes don't have much of a capability in that respect. It wouldn't be much more survivable than the Su-24 against the threat laid down in Ukraine, and the GR4 is a very complex machine to train on and operate. In fact, I said here, thank you for this. I've been waiting to listen to the reasons why tornadoes have not been offered. Someone says quite labor intensive to maintain as well. So very interesting, says someone else. I'd assumed Ukraine were primarily interested in air to ground capabilities, so the tornado would be a good option. Would be interesting to see the more detailed outline of potential value of aircraft from a Ukrainian perspective. These multi-role fighters really are going to be more useful here. That where they can lay down those seed ordnance and as well as shoot some air-to-air missiles as well. So moving on to Arestovych now. So Arestovych was the former spokesperson for the Ukrainian government. He would give daily rundowns of what was going on, and that would be translated and summarized here on Twitter by War Translated. Arestovych doesn't have that position anymore, but he still gives those rundowns. Those runs down. Sounds weird. Anyway, shut up, Piss. He still some nuggets of interest in these. I mean, you could talk about it being propaganda or whatever, but there's genuinely every day something to take away from what he says to give you an idea of what's going on in different contexts, because he has quite a wide range of things he talks about. Well, I'm just going to jump in at a particular point, and this is talking about sort of what's going on the battlefield at the moment to some degree. So it's slowly starting with regrouping in the rear, creation of second and third echelons, creation of rear reserves and headquarters at the depth of 90 kilometers to stay out of the HIMARS range for now. He's talking about the Russians. There will be no offensive on Kyiv, and none of the Western embassies is considering evacuation. So that's an interesting sign. So no Western nation is deciding to get their embassy out of Kyiv. That means that pretty much all the intelligence is suggesting that the Ukrainians will not do an offensive to Kyiv, and sorry, the Russians will not do an offensive to Kyiv. And of course, that's sensible. They shouldn't do that because it'd be pointless, and they just send a lot of their troops to their deaths. They wouldn't be capable of doing that. But some provocations in the north are possible, and there are no forces to even reach 5-kilometer depth. Wow, that's interesting. So what he's basically saying is, if you look at the map of Ukraine, they would struggle to get really any significant distance over the border anywhere along the northern border. I mean, I guess particularly from Chernihiv to Kharkiv, because not only are these heavily mined and there'll be defenses and all sorts of stuff here, but they would be hit by missiles. They'll be hit by air support. No, you're going to say that the Russians will have their own air support, but it's contested airspace here, so the Russians would be really risking it to do a brand new offensive across the border. I think he's pretty much right in saying that. I think any kind of northern attack would be pretty suicidal. The main objectives will be to cut off Siversk and encircle Bakhmut. Multiple bombings by Russia. He goes on to talk about something else. So this is interesting. The main objectives will be to cut off Siversk and encircle Bakhmut. I would generally agree that is what almost certainly what's going to happen. I talked about that in my frontline update today, so go and check that out, because I do a bit of analysis on Siversk. But just to let you know, if you haven't watched my frontline update, we have Bakhmut down here. This is on the Donetsk front. You've got the city of Donetsk just down here by Avdiivka, and then up between Lysychansk and Donetsk is Bakhmut. The Bakhmut has become this big PR campaign, possibly for both sides. It has limited tactical value, although if you want to move on to take Kramatorsk and Konstantinivka and Slovyansk, right, as an operation, that's your operation, it has operational value for sure. Like, you can't go and do this without taking Bakhmut. But in and of itself, intrinsically, Bakhmut is not hugely valuable. All these supply lines are cut off anyway, and so holding on to it's not going to gain you anything. However, there's a lot to be said about bleeding out the Russians here in Bakhmut. But he's talking about, so that's a calculation that's basically being made about Bakhmut. He's talking about Siversk and how this will be the Russians' main objective. So as well as Bakhmut. So take Bakhmut, which would be your PR objective, then take Siversk. You would need to, for goodness sake, fingers. Let's try and get that back up. So up to Siversk and take it from the south, and then come across from Bilorivka as well, and encircle Siversk and take that. And then you have kind of a front line like that. You put that together with taking Bakhmut, and it's not going to be a huge set of territorial gains here, because really that is not a lot. If that's what they're able to do in this offensive, I can't see themselves as doing much more than that, really. I mean, would they really have the capability to take Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, and Slovyansk? Like, is that? I mean, think how long it's taken to take Bakhmut, and they haven't even taken it yet, right? And then add some of these much larger cities where it's not like Popasna. The Ukrainians are now prepared. Like, if they're going to really try and march onto these, it's just going to be really, really difficult. So yeah, I agree with what Arestovych is saying here. So of Bakhmut, there's a few other things that's really worth looking at here just before we get to Bakhmut. In the last 2 days, Ukraine did 2 large hits in Novokakhovka. Now, I've seen one warehouse get hit, and I've seen it on fire. But I don't know anything about it other than that. Dozens of vehicles and dozens of enemy soldiers were destroyed. I would imagine that would be the case. So, you've got a building here, there's going to be something in there. Again, I could say at the end of my frontline updates, HIMARS are working every night. I don't necessarily know all the details, but they will be having an effect. And here is at least a claim about the effect. It's not necessarily evidence in and of itself, but I've shown you that one of the Novikhovka hits, and yeah, it would make sense that there is something in there. Rogue reports of Ukraine forces doing counterattacks today near the road of Konstantinivka to Bakhmut in the direction of Klishchivka did push back at some locations. There is maneuver defense. This is something that has been touted by many. Sorry, my fingers are particularly bad today. That actually the more that if we come down to the south of Bakhmut here, the more that the Russians succeed in punching through defenses, the more ripe they are for counterattacks. So in this case, you've got Ivanivska here, which is a really important place. If Ivanivska goes, then or Ivanivska, then Bakhmut is in trouble. So if they are punching here across the road, then this allows the Ukrainians to think, okay, yeah, you do that, stretch yourselves a bit thin, and then we'll hit you across there and punch you back. So there is a risk to succeeding too much too quickly. But nonetheless, there are some reports, rogue reports, he says, of counterattacks. But this is a bit that I find the most interesting. Bakhmut positions are ideal for grinding enemy forces. So this is a raison d'etre for the Ukrainians doing what they're doing. This is behind their decisions about Bakhmut. Russia is taking incredible losses. From a military's perspective, one or two such positions are totally worth it. So the language here, I know this is translated and summarized, so it might not be exactly what he says, but the idea is totally worth it. Like, as in, this really is a sound decision as far as the Ukrainians are concerned. Yes, real people are going to die, people with lives and aspirations and hopes and dreams and families and friends. Each one of those people is like you and I, right? Everything about our lives, all the stuff that we've experienced up till now, everything that we hold dear, the entire whole of our lives. Hundreds of people like you and I are dying every day on these front lines on both sides. So there's no small thing to say, yeah, there's calculation, but that's what you do is you kind of like take yourself out from the human aspect of this and say, here's a mathematical calculation. There are people with these whole lives just being fed into this calculation on both sides, but it's the Russians who are the aggressors here, remember. So the calculation is that this is totally worth it. The Russians are taking incredible losses. This is grinding, and as long as there aren't people who are encircled and cut off, and you have huge losses on the Ukrainian side, as long as you don't get that, then this is worthwhile continuing to do. And the idea is that there are multiple places on the front line where this either is taking place or is going to take place, and that for the Ukrainians is worth it. There you go. It can be compared to Donetsk airport, which was held for 242 days, and the ratio of enemy losses was 10 to 15 to 1. This is back when Donetsk airport was before the war, and just north of Donetsk airport they had a terrible time recently in Vodyane and Opitny, south of Avdiivka. I thought that was a really interesting insight into the thinking coming here from someone who kind of knows what he's talking about. Right, on to the next thing. Next stop is rebar. Now, why am I showing you something from rebar? Interesting theory here. Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed by American government forces. This is a conclusion of journalist Seymour Hersh, of the New Yorker. Seymour Hersh is actually a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist back from doing My Lai, the massacre in Vietnam, and doing work letting the world know about that. So I think he's 85 now. This interesting. I have to look into this, which we'll do in a second. Last summer, the U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on the pipes of a gas pipeline, as according to the article. It happened during NATO exercise Baltops 22. The decision was discussed for 9 months, and all discussions were highly classified. Discussions were focused on the exact method of sabotage. U.S. leaders feared that by continuing to buy cheap Russian gas, European countries, especially Germany, would be less willing to supply Ukraine with weapons. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was in charge of the interagency team that developed the plan. On September the 26th, the Norwegian armed forces remotely detonated the explosives. Norwegian authorities were involved in the execution of the operation, since terminating Nord Stream allowed them to increase their own gas supplies to Europe. The White House denies these, he says, facts. Right. This is interesting because I've actually been fairly split on what happened at Nord Stream because I don't know. It blew up. And actually, there are theories that are plausible for every entity involved with the whole thing being responsible for doing it. So there are explanations that show it's a good idea if Russia did that. There are explanations show it's a good idea if America did that. There's a good explanation show good reason for European players or Norway or whatever. This is actually quite plausible, and I don't necessarily think that this is anything other than a pretty interesting look at who could be responsible for this. And actually, this is a long piece of writing with a whole bunch of hyperlinked kind of referenceable evidence or supporting information concerning what happened there. I mean, you can see, look, I'm just skimming through it right now. This is a big old article. So yeah, and when you've got these comments from people supposedly involved in the decision to do this, as according to Hirsch, so the idea is the Americans did this. People like Blinken and Nuland were involved in this. Also, at a press conference last September about the consequences of the worsening energy crisis in Western Europe, Blinken described the moment as a potentially good one. Now, would he say this if he had just done this? Is it too obvious? Or is this actually good rationale for America doing this? Quote, it's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs. That's very significant, and that offers tremendous strategic opportunity for the years to come. But meanwhile, we're determined to do everything we possibly can to make sure the consequences of all this are not borne by citizens in our countries or, for that matter, around the world. Fascinating. So, actually, this is he's basically saying this is really good. It's a really good thing that the pipeline's been blown up. Okay, well, if that's a really good thing, would Russia, if we can believe what you're saying there, and you're being genuine about that, then is it plausible that Russia would have blown their own pipeline up if it was a really good thing for the rest of Europe? Now, is this a good thing for America, or is this a good thing for Europe, or is it a good thing for both? Because really, what the theory is here is that Europe wouldn't have been able to wean themselves off Russian gas in this case, unless they were forced to wean themselves off. So if that gas was freely coming through the pipeline, they'll be saying, yeah, we're going to cut down, but we're still going to keep using it. But we are going to cut down. I promise we're going to cut down. The idea is if that's like shut down straight away, right, you're forced to wean yourself off now. Let's go and look elsewhere and put our money in someone else's pockets. And then we are not propping up the Russian natural resources industries and the war. And then Russia will be forced to sell their gas elsewhere, but at a lower, no doubt at a lower price. But actually, gas is quite difficult to then transport because you've got to build pipelines. It's very difficult to liquefy it and put it in tankers, and that takes an awful lot of extra cost, logistics, and effort. And in the end, I think Russia was burning gas on a daily basis and might even still be because they couldn't store it. They couldn't stop producing it. Like it had to come out. I think the way that stuff is pumped and or drilled for or whatever. And so they had to. The only thing they could do was literally to burn it off. Certainly to some degree. I don't know how much that's happened or whether it's still going on. But yeah, and more recently, Victoria Nuland expressed satisfaction at the demise of the newest of the pipelines, testifying at a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing in late January. She told Senator Ted Cruz, like you, I am, and I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. Yeah, I don't know. Be interested to see what you think. This is a fascinating article. It's a big article. But it wouldn't surprise me if if America had been behind this with allies, and I don't even think it's a bad thing. Like strategically speaking, the outcome of this is positive, which is Europe is forced to wean themselves off Russian fossil fuels. I think that's good. So if America had done that, interesting. I don't know what the legal, moral implications are for this. I'd need to sit down and think about that. But just the straight up, America have done something to stop Russia getting gas into Europe. Yeah, I think that's a positive thing. So I think I side, and at the time I was pretty 50-50. I didn't really lay down who I thought because I didn't have enough information. Uh, but I genuinely think America might have been behind blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines. But let me know what you think and how this explanation can be wrong. But check the explanation out first. I'll put a link to his Substack in the description. And now something completely different. This is adaptation in war. We have a Lancet grid, as this guy says, on top of a 155mm howitzer, an FH70. So you can see this howitzer doing its stuff, firing away with some nice music. And this is to stop it being hit from above from a Lancet. You wonder whether a Lancet could maybe try and get under that. I don't know how effective the visuals are on a Lancet and how maneuverable they are, but certainly giving it some protection. Yeah, I think you're gonna start seeing that on top of pretty much most howitzers, is my guess. Be interested to see the Russians do the same because they are starting to get hit with. Uh, Usually, it appears sort of homemade uh, drones with improvised explosive devices. You've seen RPG-7 warheads on racing drones and stuff like that. So I wonder whether both sides are going to be starting to do things like that. But those kind of first-person drones, actually, I've seen them sort of go into trenches, and they've got quite a lot of ability to get under something like a net, and they kind of because it's a first-person drone, first-person view drone. You're looking where it's flying. It is fairly easy to go. I would have thought under a net and hit a howitzer head on, but those kind of things are still going to be pretty useful. This is an intercepted call. Russian troops kill Ukrainian prisoners of war, as evidenced by this intercepted call between two Russian soldiers, which Ukraine's intelligence published today. Ukrainian troops have no mercy for POWs in Ukraine. So these are two guys talking. Again, I'll talk you through it because I know a lot of you listen to this as an audio presentation rather than watching. So the conversation goes like this. Told you we don't take prisoners. Russian serviceman describes committing war crimes. Okay. In fact, it's easier if I do this. Yes, we are after it. We were clearing, finishing them off. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, they all should be crushed, each of them. Who could escape? Who could escape did. A grenade was thrown into their trench. They hid. One was shredded, two dead. One was alive and screaming, "Don't shoot! Don't kill me!" Was he Ukrainian? I wonder that question is because so many people genuinely believe that there are Polish fighters and all sorts, and then you've got the International Legion fighting there. The idea that these people, even on my threads, two people yesterday came up with these ridiculous figures for like 2,534 NATO troops have been killed in Ukraine. It's like shut up, absolute nonsense, or whatever the figure was. Was he Ukrainian? Yeah, a Ukrainian swear word. Was he killed? I shot him. I had to kick a recruit as he hesitated, looking at me. I pushed. I shot him. The recruit said, yeah, thanks. I said, what for? The recruit explained that he was a bit confused. He didn't know what to do with prisoners. I told him in plain Russian, we don't take prisoners. There's no mercy for them. That's right. And there you go. We don't take prisoners. There's no mercy for them. And this guy shoots if this is to be believed, shoots a guy who's willing to surrender, and the guy that he's effectively training or who will learn from this, a recruit, then obviously now understands that they don't take prisoners, and if someone offers to surrender, they just shoot them. And we heard that from a Russian POW yesterday, whose conversation, with an interviewer, that showed that if they raise their hands, we shoot them. Don't take prisoners. Okay, that those are war crimes. Yes. This now. In fact, no. I'm going to leave that till last. Leave that till last because that's a positive thing, rather than just war, war, war. Okay, another example of Ukrainian professionalism. This Ukrainian BTR-4 raises with its 30mm cannon. The Russian Z-Waves are the Wagner unit, while Ukrainian infantry covers the flanks, including sweeping. There's a full video of this, but this is the guy with a stick pointing at it, which is, I think, Magyar. So here we've got a 30mm cannon. Apparently, this is North Bakhmut as well, where, interestingly, Wagner don't have much mechanization or any mechanization. Here we have the Ukrainians using that effectively, one would think, firing, suppressing fire. Meanwhile, there are troops, I think there's a few troops, you start seeing troops come up there. So just rewind it a little bit. So he's hammering away. I don't know that they are there yet. I'm seeing things. So he's firing away. Meanwhile, there are troops working in unison with this, which is combined arms. So often at the beginning of the war, we saw Russian tanks just on their own get taken out. And we've seen, how not to do warfare. Well, here we've got Ukrainian troops going up, sweeping, doing X, Y, and Z, whilst this guy is doing its stuff. And they are at the same time helping to protect that. There's a kind of symbiotic relationship between the mechanized equipment and the troops. They're sweeping through the buildings, and he's taking out the 30mm cannon, as I've shown you previously, is no walk in the park. It's a useful bit of kit. It can do a lot of damage, and in a kind of urban environment like that, you want to be taking shelter. So that's suppressing, and that allows the troops to then run out and get their positions, and so on and so forth. So anyway, just a useful bit of footage there of the BTR hammering away in an urban environment. Yeah. On to something else, and this is something that a commentator has provided the last couple of days. Really pretty useful. Now, every day in my news update, I give you the Russian losses that are produced by the Ukrainians. So they produce the figures for the Russian losses, and I always say that, arguably inaccurate propaganda, but they are indicative. They do show you things and they show you trends. And that's what I find interesting. So the last few days have had record numbers of troops lost. That tells me that something's going on the front lines that's not good for Russia. It appears that around Avdiivka, they're making huge losses. They're making huge losses in Bakhmut. Okay, you could argue that's the same for the Ukrainians, but just as a picture of what's going on, it's interesting. And the APVs that have been lost recently in last week have been through the roof. Well, that explains what's going on in Vuhledar, as well as obviously the troops in Vuhledar as well. So Maccaberry on my comments thread for the last 2 days has done this, which I think is really nice little bit of work he's done. So thank you. It takes a bit of time, so I appreciate that. Liquidated personnel total 134,000. By the way, the move from 100 to 134,000 has been really quite quick. We are in a stage of intense attritional warfare at the moment, the likes of which we hadn't seen previously during this war. Many commentators are saying it's going to get worse as well. The next sort of few months will be a tough time, for both sides. So yesterday 910 is up. So 384 is the average daily amount. So I've been talking about like sort of 500 being average, just what I was thinking intuitively, but no, 384. So it's been obviously many more days earlier on in the war were much lower than that. And that is that just goes to show that when it's been around 600-700 for weeks and weeks, I'm thinking, oh, that's a little bit above average. It's quite a lot above average, and that's just an indictment of how attritional the warfare has been. APVs or APCs, 15, which is actually down to 18 and a half is the average. That's huge. They're almost losing 20 APVs a day. Now, their APVs or APCs do cover quite a range of types of vehicle. So that's going to be IFVs, APCs, MRAPs, all these different types of vehicles will be included, I think, in APVs. Um, uh, so that would explain why, as a category, it has quite a high average. The average for artillery is 6 per day, being like 6.4. So actually, that's fairly high, and that's higher than I thought. So it's really interesting to get. This is actually enabling me to kind of anchor my idea of what's been going on. So I really appreciate that. I should actually just take a snapshot of that so that I can have, at least for next sort of month or so, what is generally an idea of the average, rather than the having to calculate on a daily basis. But that is really useful work. Thank you, community. You are legends. And as he says here, as you rightly say, the numbers themselves are rubbery for sure, but the trend going up or down and the comparison to the average are actually very informative. 14.6 vehicles and fuel tanks is the average. Wow. It just goes to show the vast number, 5,112, of vehicles, of trucks, of logistical vehicles they have lost, which is damaging their ability to do warfare. War is logistics. Where to next? Well, let's have a look at Shashank Joshi, who's the defense correspondent for The Economist, going through Estonia's new foreign intelligence report and summarizing it in tweets in bite-sized chunks. So this is fantastic. Some really interesting information coming out of the Estonian intelligence report. So here he summarizes it. Russia will not run out of cannon fodder or Soviet-era armaments anytime soon. However, a quality leap in Russia's warfighting capability is very unlikely. Putin is playing for time. In other words, there are plenty of humans they can throw at the problem, but they're not going to increase their capability, which is kind of what I've been saying for a long time. They can throw humans at the problem, but they can't throw better equipment at the problem, which the Ukrainians can, because they are getting given better equipment by foreign agents and entities. Russia are not, and that is the asymmetry that is hugely important. To continue, the prospects for the current regime collapsing and the country democratizing are slim, despite the problems caused by the war and Western sanctions. On the contrary, even more radical faction is rising to the fore. I agree with this, but hadn't previously considered that actually this kind of us and them ramification of sanctions and making Russia the pariah state that they deserve to be will have the effect of driving a lot of people to hate the rest of the world within Russia and blaming. They'll be sucking up all the state narrative they can get their hands on. Well, for many people, they don't have the choice but to consume that narrative, and they will be driven to a polarized view. And they'll be driven away from Western kind of thought, which is why people um, the fighting for control of the information space are saying that the West, America, UK, EU, and allies should be creating a positive narrative to throw back in a kind of fifth generation warfare, fighting in that information space to the Russians. We need to take the war in the information space to the Russians. Don't just be on the defensive the whole time. It continues. Although Russian mobilization reserves have enough equipment to form new units, finding competent personnel for the units' headquarters may be unrealistic. Many Russian armed forces instructors have been transferred away. Long time been a problem. Since the war began, they started putting their trainers on the front line, and then they got no one to do the training. Belarusian army's direct involvement in the Ukrainian conflict would be a political gesture with no significant strategic impact on the course of the war. Very interesting. And there's talk about actually could the Belarusians, I think it might come from this as well. I think, say it later. No, there's the theory that they could defect as well. Belarusian fighters could defect and fight for, like, the Belarusian volunteer units fighting for Ukraine. The intelligence report continues. In the autumn of 2022, Belarus also began to supply Russia with T-72 tanks. According to our information, Russia's defense ministry also demanded that Belarusian experts be sent to Russia to repair equipment damaged in the war in Ukraine. The Russians are experiencing difficulties finding officials willing to work in occupied territories amidst near hostilities. Personal safety is likely to be the primary concern. So, getting teachers, getting doctors, getting people to work in these occupied areas. So, they're kind of flushing out all the old Ukrainian teachers. They want to bring in teachers who are going to toe the party line and teach this very Russia-centric curriculum. Well, if they can get teachers that are that nationalistic and want to do that, that's one thing, and then teachers that are willing to do that, but in very dangerous situations where there's basically next to a war zone. And then finally, Russian diplomats were also kept in the dark about Putin's plans to attack Ukraine. According to our information, they found out about it on the morning of 24th of February through the media. Confusion and bewilderment ensued. Very interesting. In fact, there's more to be said on that. Other people have summarized it in longer tweet threads. So you can go and have a look at that at its source. Really interesting work done by the Estonians there. And finally, I'm going to give you the positive, which is this. Look at this guy, Ukrainian Dmytro Kotovsky won the World Cup in ski acrobatics. 21-year-old athlete brilliantly performed the most difficult jump in history, triple somersault with 5 twists, also known as the hurricane. Right? I mean, I can do that. I've got MS and I can struggle to kind of like walk upstairs at the moment, but I could probably do that if I, a couple of weeks practice. It's not difficult. Obviously, highly impressive. Now, why am I showing you this? It's the idea that life goes on. So, despite Ukraine being in a war, I think it's still really important that they keep life as normal as possible, which means sporting engagements, as difficult as it is to get training, to get funding, to all the kind of things like that. It gives them a chance, like the nation, a chance to be distracted by positive things. It gives people in the nation a chance to have their goals and dreams still realized in spite of a war. And it's 2 fingers up to Putin. It's like, yeah, you wanna invade our country? Well, check this like hurricane somersault out. Yeah, ain't gonna stop that, Putin. So it's a kind of as I say, 2 things up to Putin and the regime to say we are still a country with an identity, and under our national flag, we are going to perform on a world stage in different sports, and we will succeed. So I think that I think something like this, you might just look at that and not think about it much, but actually, it's always worth asking, what does this tell me? What does this show me? And not only that, not only what does it tell me, what does it do for the nation of Ukraine? And likewise, what does it do for the people in charge in the Kremlin? Anything like this. So always think about looking at things from other people's point of view. Me banging on. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out and being as interested as I am in this kind of stuff. Massive shout out to members and the new members, Davinci and Hans Bottomans, Robert Kierstad, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you so much for joining. Bill Nicodemus, David Puz, Tom MPS, Sabra Bursovic, as ever, and a deep geopod thinker. So he's going to get to tell me what he wants a video on at some point, hopefully. Mikey Bump, Imre Hadju, Subhero, Robespierre 1, Scott Milan, Leah Kroll, Elim Tavir, Andres Erdvix, James Cottle, Mark Schwarman, Hans-Peter Nielsen, Tyler Crockett, John Lloyd, Memos, Mitch Mazarol, Kevin Alexander, Yonanis Kilioris, and Ian Ratner. Thank you so much to all of you. You are legends, one and all. And Da Vinci as well, deep geopod thinker. So they get to like advise me on what they should do. So I'm going to put out a little bit of a thread for those two particularly, but some more threads for everyone else and a bit of content as well for everyone else. It's really difficult because I throw out so much content. It's trying to find the time. But anyway, love you guys. It's brilliant. So, thanks so much for your support. Anyway, everyone, take care. I will speak to you tomorrow.